टॉपिक नंबर 6, फ्लोएम ट्रांसपोर्ट फ्लो फ्रॉम सोर्स टू सिंक, मतलब जहाँ से बना और जहाँ यूज होगा. फूड primarily sucrose is transported by the vascular tissue phloem from a source to sink. Usually the source is understood to be that part of the plant which synthesizes the food, the leaf, and sink the part that needs or stores the food. But the source and sink may be reversed depending on the season or the plant's needs. Sugar stored in roots may be mobilized to become a source of food in the early spring when the buds of trees act as sink. They need energy for growth and development of photosynthetic apparatus. Since the source sink relationship is variable, the direction of movement in the phloem can be upwards or downwards, bidirectional. This contrasts with that of the xylem where the movement is always unidirectional, that is upwards. Hence, unlike one-way flow of water in transpiration, food in phloem sap can be transported. Unlike one-way flow of water in transpiration, food in phloem sap can be transported in any required direction, so long as there is a source of sugar and sink able to use, store or remove the sugar. Phloem sap is mainly water and sucrose, but other sugars, hormones and amino acids are also transported or translocated through phloem. द प्रेशर फ्लो और मास फ्लो हाइपोथेसिस कौन दिया था? मुंच, MUNCH, मंच नहीं मुंच. द एक्सेप्टेड मैकेनिज्म यूज्ड फॉर द ट्रांसलोकेशन ऑफ सुगर्स फ्रॉम सोर्स टू सिंक इज द कॉल्ड प्रेशर फ्लो हाइपोथेसिस. फिगर 11.10 में देख लेंगे. एज ग्लूकोज इज प्रिपेयर्ड एट द सोर्स बाय फोटोसिंथेसिस, it is converted to sucrose, a disaccharide. The sugar is then moved in the form of sucrose into the companion cells and then into the living phloem sieve tube cells by active transport. This process of loading at the source produces a hypotonic condition in the phloem. Water in the adjacent xylem moves into the phloem by osmosis. As osmotic pressure builds up the phloem, sap will move to areas of lower pressure. At the sink, osmotic pressure must be reduced. Again, active transport is necessary to move the sucrose out of the phloem sap and into the cells which will use the sugar, converting it into energy. Starch or cellulose. As sugars are removed, the osmotic pressure decreases and water moves out of the phloem. To summarize, the movement of sugars in the phloem begins at the source, where sugars are loaded, actively transported into a sieve tube. Loading of the phloem sets up a water potential gradient that facilitates the mass movement in the phloem. Phloem tissue is composed of sieve tube cells which form long columns with holes in their end walls called sieve plates. Cytoplasmic strands pass through the holes in the sieve plates, so forming continuous filaments. As hydrostatic pressure in the sieve tube of phloem increases, pressure flow begins and the sap moves through the phloem. Meanwhile, at the sink, incoming sugars are actively transported out of the phloem and removed. मैं यहाँ पर पहले दिखा दूँ कि sugars leave sieve tubes, water flows by osmosis, tip of stem है. तो अच्छा, तो नीचे पहले ये diagrammatic representation of mechanism of translocation है. तो sugars leave sieve tubes, ठीक है. sieve tube से sugar क्या हुआ, वहाँ से leave हुआ, sucrose हुआ. water flows by osmosis से थ्रू. tip of stem है. उसके बाद क्या हुआ, यहाँ से सुगर आया. सुगर सॉल्यूशन फ्लोज टू रीजन ऑफ लो टर्गर प्रेशर। अच्छा, मतलब रीजन जो है लो टर्गर प्रेशर में आएगा। फ्लोएम है। शुगर्स इंटर्स द सीव ट्यूब, वाटर फ्लोज बाय ऑस्मोसिस, हाई टर्गर प्रेशर। शुगर इंटर कर रहा है जहाँ पे हाई टर्गर प्रेशर है। शुगर लीव सीव ट्यूब फॉर मेटाबॉलिज्म एंड स्टोरेज, वाटर फ्लोज बाय ऑस्मोसिस। चलेगा, ये रूट का स्ट्रक्चर है। तो लाइन कंप्लीट करते हैं कि मीन वाइल एट द सिंक इनकमिंग शुगर्स are actively transported out of the phloem are removed as complex carbohydrates. The loss of solute produces a high water potential in the xylem and water passes out, the returning eventually to xylem. A simple experiment called girdling was used to identify the tissues through which food is transported. On the trunk of a tree, a ring of bark up to a depth of the phloem layer can be carefully removed. In the absence of downward movement of food, the portion of the bark above the ring on the stem becomes swollen after a few weeks. This simple experiment shows that phloem is the tissue responsible for translocation of food and that transport takes place in the one direction towards the roots. This experiment can be performed by you easily. ये तुम भी एक्सपेरिमेंट कर सकते हो।